Good evening, everyone. It's 5:30 and we're here for the Biddeford Saco Joint Steering Committee. And I believe everybody is present. I see Councilor Lessard from Biddeford, Councilor Purdy from Saco, Councilor Archer from Saco. And I believe we have Councilor Michael Reddy from Biddeford with us. We also have City Administrator for Biddeford, Jim Bennett, and also City Administrator for Saco, Brian Cainrath.
Jim's
and
a
then
manager.
Of course, sorry. And then we also have Mayor Cassavan and Police Chief Joanne Fisk for Biddeford and Police Chief Jack Clements for Saco. Or is it Deputy Chief? I'm sorry, I don't want to get the title correct because I believe Chief Beaupre would be very upset with me if I dismissed his title for sure. So with that, everybody is here. If anyone's missing, they can catch us up. But as you all know, I like to run an effect fully an hour because that's what I have. I have a commitment at 6:30. I hope we can get through the 3 items on the agenda in that time. But also I can push some things around to make more time if we get into some good substantive discussion. With that, the first thing up on the agenda is the discussion regarding dispatch operations. Last summer, I believe we had a brief conversation about this and we talked about setting aside some money in our budgets for any kind of ongoing discussions. And we did that. I know that I believe both sides, Biddeford and Saco, put away, I believe it was $25,000 earmarked in the budget for operational costs should we need to go out for a consultant to talk about it and I believe that's where it ended. I don't believe we have an update at this time. City Administrator Cainrath, do you remember any sort of update other than that?
Yeah, I don't know anything beyond that. I know we talked about doing a feasibility study or reaching out to a consultant, but I think that's where we left off. Correct me if I'm wrong, someone.
Mayor Cassavan?
That's what I recall.
Yeah, where it got left was that we were supposed to develop a request for proposals so that you guys could take a look at it to hire somebody to come in and do that. I think that was primarily on my desk, and I didn't get it done. So that's I'm responsible for not getting that taken care of.
Sounds like a COVID casualty.
We have those from time to time. So
plenty of reasons, said, no excuses.
Is there, I guess from the committee, is there still an appetite to look at this? Is there still an appetite? I know on our side, it's the city of Saco, our communication issues have not improved. I mean, they're not horrible, but they haven't improved, and we will need to do something long-term in the future. So, Councilor Archer?
Yeah, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, I believe the discussion of this was operationally, it does make sense. Again, maybe more assessment from an outside provider to confirm that. But in a lot of cases, it was because of an aging communication system that will have to be replaced in several years from now. So my collection was that we were bringing this forward so that possibly when the upgrade systems has to happen, I know Biddeford has a better one than we do. It's more recent. I still think is it still relatively old, or I know it's a better version than we have, but I thought the purpose of this was that we'd have that high-tech Scarborough type in the future.
So
it's not my background, so I don't know. It's just based on what I'm remembering.
Jim, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, you've got a couple levels here. If you're going to take a look at what is going on, let me start on the Biddeford side. We've just committed like $4.6 million to upgrade all our radios, so we're in the process of doing that. With rare exception, most of that, as I understand it, is kind of plug and play, and it can be adjusted. And there obviously will be some setup, removal, that kind of cost, but it's not like a complete sunken cost that can't get recovered. And we've made the decision we had to do that. I think the issue, you got a couple of issues if you're going to take a look at this. One issue is from an operations standard, is there going to be any efficiency? And I think you got to have somebody come in that knows this to be able to say, based on the way you're currently staffing and what you have for demands and where the things are at, you're either going to have some potential operational savings or you're not, or it actually may end up costing you more. So that you get that first number and you head on that. And that's just on if you magically had a place to put everybody and all the equipment was there. Then I think the second piece is if there's a decision that it makes sense to move forward because of operations, either because of cost or efficiency, then you got to figure out how you're going to do the governance and how you're going to put all the and how you're going to make decisions about where's it going to be located, who's going to run it. I mean, all that other kind of stuff. Quite frankly, that's the more difficult conversation. But I do still think that you have to do a quick, the communities have to do a quick, have somebody independently either tell you you're going to save some money, no money, or it actually may cost you some money before you can get to the second level discussion. You don't want to be chasing 6 months or 9 months of governance discussion and then come to find out that the assumption is that you're going to save money and then come and find out, well, it's actually going to cost you more on your operational side.
So I guess we're at the point now where, do we see it as feasible? Again, we don't know the answer, but is it worth spending the money to get the consultant to provide that report to find out if it's feasible? Are we at that point now? The money's already been set aside based on last year's budget. I don't believe any of that's been spent that I know of.
And just kind of spitballing that, for a lack of a better technical term on it, I would say that that initial review, in order to give you a high level analysis of whether or not you can save any money or what that efficiency factor would look like, would probably be in the $15,000 to $25,000 range would be my guess. And I have a comfort level on that number of like 50%. So it's not like I'm saying that it's like a 90% confidence on this. It's more like a weatherman or weather person forecast on what I think that number would be, folks.
So would it be best if we, sorry about that, Mr. Mayor, would it be best if we get the dollar figure before we commit to this project or to this? Go out there and get some bids, see how much it's going to cost, because it's going to be shared between our two communities.
Yeah, I would say, Counselor, that we got to go back to where I dropped the ball, which is you got to just develop the RFP and put it out there. You'll find out on the RFP what the expectation of the financial numbers are going to be. I mean, I don't think you would want to have us go and do a short list, even though I'm guessing there's probably less than a half a dozen people in the state that could even do this at any level. I'm guessing you would want it a little bit more formal, given some of the sensitivity around the issues, than having like Brian and I end up doing a short list and get a couple people in and interview them and then bring that back without going through a little more formal process. Certainly would save some time if that you were all comfortable with that. We could do that as well.
So it sounds like for the next meeting, maybe we look at bringing this back in the next meeting. Maybe Jim, after there's been some opportunity to formulate an RFP for discussion or for a company to come in and bid on what that would look like.
Unless the six of you are sitting here going, you know what, the amount of money we're potentially going to spend and how much time we have in this and where we're at. No, we're comfortable that you don't really need to do a formal RFP. And if you want to go through a list of getting qualified people and walking them through some sort of process a little less formally, then we could just proceed with that and try to have some information back to you in time for your next meeting.
Councilor Lessard?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'm perfectly fine with option 2. I don't know that we have to go through the process of a strict, RFP for something like this. I think it's fine with the second option that the city manager gave to us, one person's opinion.
Thank you.
But the other thing I want to add on in that, I'm sorry, Mayor, is that the intent of having this fund between our two cities to be able to look at joint projects, as far as I'm concerned, was not meant to put in a fund and then carry it over into next year. This was to be able to get some things done and get the ball rolling between our two cities. As a matter of fact, if we carry it over into next year, I'm going to be disappointed because that's not going to provide the traction that I would like to have between our two cities to do more together in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lessard. I couldn't agree more. Councilor Reddy?
Yeah, two things. One, I agree with Councilor Lessard, which isn't all that common, but maybe COVID related. But I think, having Jim bring back information. The other thing, I guess, more of a question to Jim is the company we choose for this, will they look at the operation too? One of the things and Mark, you may correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the last time we looked, or Joanne, at the operation was when the state changed the structure and, the counties were going to be the handling all of this stuff. So will they look at the operation? Because it's not just will we save some money, but will we be able to do the job better?
Right.
Yeah, from my perspective, if that's one of the criteria you want to look at is both, if it was a combined center, what would the staffing levels look like? And do a quick, again, a fairly high level review of both operations and say, not only do we think your staffing levels would look like this, because that's going to drive your cost factors, but we also either believe that it will be the same level of service, better, or potentially less. And they could do that at a fairly high level, Mike, without getting into a lot of detail. I mean,
Good.
it's somewhat complicated by sort of how the phone calls come in now compared to the old days. And Joanne, if I say something that you're, or Chief, if I say something that you're uncomfortable with, please correct me. So that kind of gets a little bit more complex in terms of how quickly you have to answer the call, and you have multiple people calling on phone calls with the cells and everything else. But the rest of it is not as complicated as you think at the high level. That's at least my experience of what I understand about it based on some of the stuff I've done in the past. Is that fair?
I'm not sure what you mean by the higher level. It is actually more complicated because the state has required us to do emergency medical dispatching, emergency fire dispatching, and there's a large amount of training. There's quality assurance programs that have to be done along with both of those protocols. And of course, on our end of things, we also answer for fire and EMS for several other towns. So
what I meant though, Joanne, is at a high level in terms of based on the number of calls for services and based on the number of calls, physical phone calls that are coming into the facility, the models and what you need for staffing in order to meet the state requirement is not that complicated. I mean, how you do the work is way more complicated today than it was even 5 years ago. That's what I mean by the higher level.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair.
So it sounds like there's still some interest in researching this and looking at it, and then just putting it on another agenda to have something to come back to us with, and kind of have some options for this committee to look at and suggest a step in the direction of looking at an analysis. That's my understanding and consensus of where we are.
So there's consensus, we don't need to do the RFP process?
It seems that there's no objection to using, as Jim put it, a less formal process of selecting a company, an analysis company, rather than the full RFP process. Okay, so with that, we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Harbormaster. And I know we shared some documentation that we were able to find about the Harbormaster, and I guess it was a document that was already drafted, created, and worked on by the previous joint group, and just needs to kind of get revitalized and refreshed for this for this group and see if that's something we're going to do this year. Anyone want to take the lead on it? Is there
Maybe
still,
hear
I
from
guess,
the,
is there any interest in still doing a joint harbor master position? I guess is the first question.
Mr. Mayor, I was going to maybe suggest, I don't know if we want to hear from the chiefs about how they thought the Harbor Patrol went this last year. I know we both committed personnel to that effort this last summer, and maybe just get their thoughts as well.
That's fine.
Hi, my name's Jack Clements. I'm the chief in Saco. So in the summertime, this past summer, we had a Biddeford police officer and a Saco police officer that were out working the river. The feedback that I received was nothing short of phenomenal. And it's not just working in the Saco River. They go out into Saco Bay, they go over into Biddeford Pool, they're out around the islands. Everything that I heard was very positive. The Saco River, or the Saco Basin, is the third busiest recreational waterway in the state. So I do think that it needs some level of oversight and enforcement from both communities, but I think it went great. Again, the feedback was awesome. They had a lot of contacts, and based on that, we really didn't have too many incidents out there. So I thought it went well. That's my feedback.
Thank you, Chief. And actually, I will say that both having been stopped by the patrol boat on the river when I was kayaking with former Councilor Copeland and some others, they were very professional and they did a fantastic job. And I won't say who wasn't wearing their life vest, but that was the reason for the stop.
I can tell you from our point of view, I know Chief Beaupre supports it 100%.
Do we define harbor master the same way? I think that would be the only hiccup. I have no problem with the joint harbor master. But there was discussions in the past, I think, of us making it an officer, the harbor master. I know there's a process for that. I guess what we really have to identify is, do we define the harbor master roles and responsibilities to be the same? Because if we don't have that clarity of this is what we expect of a harbor master this way, and they can't blend, then this discussion really can't happen. However, if we do view a future harbor master position in the same capacity, then I think there is room for discussion.
The joint document, I believe, Council Archer identified, because it was a joint document, identified how the harbor master would work and under which they would work. So
and
whether they would
the
be
one that's like 10 years old and disappeared for a while. Because there's
the
always
one that
different
was worked,
drafts, and
yeah.
That's why I need to make sure we're looking at the same draft, I guess.
Yeah, the latest one that was sent and found by the city, I think it was sent by Brian out to everybody. That was the latest cooperative draft between the parties. Councilor Lassard?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. For me, the first question is whether we want to have a joint harbor master, and the answer is yes. Okay. If you answer yes to that question, the details of how it's going to be structured and time and hours and all the other stuff, we'll just work that out.
Mhm.
It's whether we want to have one or we don't. If we want to, then we're going to have some smart people put their heads together, come up with a plan. We're going to approve it, and it's going to be done. And it's going to be another item that the two cities do jointly.
Mhm.
So I'm all in support of this.
And our harbor master, Dan Chadbourne, fully supports this endeavor. Jim?
Yeah, I don't have you, because I'm a co-host, I don't have the ability to raise my electronic hand. Well, there's a couple more pieces here. One is the language that was drafted was never agreed to by both cities. In fact, the language that's drafted has some language in there that took away options of who currently was serving in the harbor master role in Biddeford And it was written very specifically, so those individuals could not serve in that role. And that's a major source of issue that's underneath the water that's there. The other big issue you have is from an economic standpoint, we are completely opposite ends of what we invest in the Harbormaster process. Saco invests a lot more in your process, but you also have a revenue stream to be able to help pay for that. Biddeford is on the other end of that. And I would say that if you look at the combined budgets between the two, Saco's probably spending about 75% on their program, and Biddeford's probably spending about 25%. And so the concept of being able to try to combine that together, yeah, the tripping point why it never got anywhere is really those two issues. And that's going to be the ones that have to be wrestled with, because, you know, all of a sudden having one community paying more in order to lessen the load on another community is always going to end up being the challenge. You know, we ran into that with another thing that we attempted to do that ended up basically blowing up at the last minute. And we've got to get some clarity around how we're going to deal with whoever's the person that's not, you know, when we play the, you know, the little game with the music plays and then it stops and you sit in a chair. We got to figure out how we're going to deal with whoever ends up without chairs in that process, because if you have one Harbormaster and you got 3 people that are performing that job, you're going to have a couple of people to get left out. And that's part of the issue that created some of the inability to get to a finish line on that.
I'll tell you from the Saco side, our current Harbormaster has no interest in being the full Harbormaster. So that eliminates one of the 3 that may be impacted. But you know, I understand the challenges of staffing and personnel. I think, again, if this is something we want to do, if it's a joint operation we want to do, we need to just find a way to do it and work out the kinks as we go. Councilor Lassard?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not going to trip over, you know, one city, my city, spending an extra $5,000, $10,000, $12,000 over a particular joint effort or something like that when our budgets are in 50, 60, $70 million a year. Okay, so, you know, and I'm saying that as being a big fiscal conservative, okay? But we can't be tripping over that stuff anymore. Secondly, it may not be a Harbormaster position if there's 3 people that are kind of sort of doing the role now to some extent. It may be a Harbormaster team, Harbormaster department. I'm using words, okay? But it could be that one of the 3 ends up being the highest ranking or the person in charge. Again, I'm just using words. So all 3 can participate, because we're starting from square zero. We can build this whatever way that we want to.
Thank you. Councilor Reddy?
But I think Mark is right, but I think we need to have the discussion on the Biddeford side to answer Jim's question, because I think while it's not a huge amount of money, it's more than $12,000. I mean, we know that it's going to cost, Biddeford's going to have to make an investment that they haven't always seemed willing to make in the past. I'm not suggesting that now isn't the right time to do this. And I do think that Mark is right. If the councils on both sides decide this is the way to go, we can get the policies and procedures done, the language, you know, to govern this we can come up with. But I think before we go too much further, we need to have that discussion on this side, whether that's something that this council is willing to go ahead with.
Councilor Lassard?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So the way that I look at the spending of the money is in the aggregate. Okay, so if we have 5 projects that we're working at jointly, okay, for Saco to spend an extra $10,000 on each project to spend $50,000 more than Biddeford on a particular year is not fair. Okay, by individual project, you know, it works. But the idea is at the end of the year, and as you're building more and more that we're doing together, we have to keep a running total of who's participated more. So when the next project comes online, you're able to better flatten the trajectory to make sure that neither party is carrying the majority of the load, if that makes sense.
So who's covering the bar tab now?
Oh, you know,
Who's got the
right.
bar tab this time, or who has it
Right.
this time? Yes.
I mean, basically basically that's what I'm talking about, you know? And there's gonna be faith to be able to just do that between the two cities. It's going way too long where we don't have that type of relationship. And I'm damned to make sure that it happens now.
It's more of an issue in the beginning. Once we
Right.
develop a relationship and we're working cooperatively on a lot of projects, then, you know, a couple $1,000s here or there is not a big deal. We're looking at the outcome of the thing. But I think, you know, right now, we've had discussions in the past, Mark, about the Harbormaster, and it hasn't been, you know, I think we need, before we say this group ought to, you know, come up with a plan and present it, make sure that before we go through all that work, that there is willingness on our side to, and I'm not suggesting there isn't, I just want to make sure before we task people that are already overworked to come up with another plan, that we're sure that it's something that there's support for.
Yep.
Thank you. Mayor Castleman. You're muted, Mayor Castleman.
He does best when he's muted.
I am a mutation. I think that both Mark and Mike are correct. I think on our side, we have to make sure that the council has a political will, because as if you know Paul, AKA Wazoo, he's very verbal and vocal. And I never got the impression that he was in favor of this for a number of reasons. And I think Jim actually alluded to that. So I think that's important to do. In terms of money, Mark is right. We talked maybe 4 or 5 years ago, again, looking at the aggregate number of projects done together and how maybe that would be a wash in terms of total cost, whereas an individual project, sometimes maybe one city would be carrying the burden more than the other. But that's all dependent on faith and trust. So that's important. And the piece too, when we were talking about the monitoring on the river, you know, in the past, it's been very clear to me that there are situations on the Biddeford side when we have an officer on the river, when we have shortages in staffing, then suddenly that individual is pulled off the river to fill whatever void exists. So it seems to me that there should be an independent budget in the harbor commission or whatever, where you have an individual that is being paid out of that fund. So you don't have that situation where you lose the staffing because of other priorities. So there has to be some sort of independence, I guess is what I'm saying, in terms of this position.
Jim.
I mean, the solution here is, I think, pretty easy. So all you have to do is go up and down the coast in other communities, and we know the model that works. What happens is you have a law enforcement person that's sworn as the Harbormaster. It's a full-time position, and they do that job. And you know, we have them. I think there's one in Freeport. I know there's one in Brunswick because it's my nephew-in-law. And you go along, and that's the model, and you've got your patrol taken care of, you got all the things taken care of. It's just the question is, are the two communities, one, ready to grow your Harbormaster to the level of professionalism and at where you want it to be compared to what everybody else does? And second, are you ready to pay the cost to be able to do that? And that's really the issue that, and if you're going to do this and do it right, I mean, I don't want to oversimplify it, but that's what I understand to be the models that work and work well. And, you know, chief and the deputy chief probably aren't saying anything, but, you know, they can do the homework the same way. And that's the model that works.
Yeah, Mr. Bennett, I have looked at some of the other communities. So, Scarborough has a full-time harbor master. I don't know if Brunswick still does or not, but Brunswick did have 2 full-time police officers working in the harbor master role. Wells has a full-time harbor master. I believe Kittery does. So there are models out there. The last time this came up was a couple of years ago, so I'd have to refresh my research. But when I did it a few years ago, I do know that Brunswick had 2 doing it.
So, I mean, the question is, if you want to do it, you want to do it right, you're probably looking at between the 2 communities, at least 1.5 full-time people in order to cover what you need. And then you would have some flexibility during the your shoulder season to do something a little different. You're probably looking at, you're looking at between $150,000 and $200,000 investment in terms of personnel. That's the number. And we spend about 20 grand. Now, if we add in the amount of hours and what we do with patrol and an officer on the patrol and do some other things, we might be able to get up closer to maybe 60 to 75,000 without really having that information directly in front of me. But that's embedded in the day-to-day operations of the PD now.
If you're talking,
Joanne,
if you're talking sworn officer, you've also got, all the training, the mandatory trainings that they have to do every year, and just outfitting people is a huge financial drain. So there's a lot to consider if you're thinking of putting a 1.5 person, as Mr. Bennett says, in there. It's a big cost factor, at least 200,000.
And I think anything less than that, you're going to be trying to move from sort of this, what I would describe as maybe a grandparents' harbor master model, and trying to edge it up a little bit over the time, and it will have its aches and pains, and it will have its issues that have, quite frankly, have been the ones underneath everything that we've been trying to do that end up making this a little clumsy as you try to go through it.
Councilor Lassard.
Oh, I'd make a recommendation that before our next meeting, whenever it gets scheduled, we can each query our councils independently to say, hey, there's this thought of having a harbor master system between the 2 cities. This could cost $100,000 to $125,000 per city. It would be good to get that number refined before we actually bring that number, to each of our cities. And does Biddeford, do you have the stomach to be able to do this? These are the tasks that they would do. This is the responsibility that they would do. Here's what they would do for both of our cities. And do we find that as something that we would like to invest in? And that would give both cities the chance to go and speak to our own councils independently. And then 4 weeks from now, 6 weeks from now, we come back and share what the results of those conversations were. That is just a recommendation.
Hearing no objections, Councilor Lassard, I think that's a great way to end that discussion and move on to the next. Is that the councils will be queried to see if they're interested in going along with that as we enter budget season. The next item on the agenda is a discussion.
Mayor, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Okay, I really am. Would it be possible that the document that Biddeford and Saco brings to our councils, could it be like the same document? That way we're able to say to our council, hey, Saco's looking at this exact same thing here. Okay, they're bringing the exact same thing to that council. I think it just gives more foundation to the fact that we're actually jointly doing it. And I pardon my interruption.
No worries. I think that can be worked on between the Brian and Jim to identify a document work on that together, and then both sides are presenting that document to their respective councils.
Thank you.
So a document, are we primarily talking about costs that we're looking at right here?
Simple
think-
Word doc.
Right, I think we're looking at a document that kind of just outlines, this is the potential impact of doing a joint harbor master. This is a fiscal impact. This is what it's going to cost. These are the ancillary issues, and then what their duties might be together jointly, and move on. And then, talk about how our harbor master won't be out there anymore doing what he does, because the new harbor master, wherever that may be, would be doing those duties. So basically just almost like a job description, but not necessarily a job description. Do you think that's doable, Brian, Jim?
I think so. I think we need some input from our PDs. That would be helpful, maybe. But sure, Jim.
Yeah, but I'd say is that what we would do is just basically tell you what the modern model would potentially look like. I think you just outlined sort of what this would look like and what does this mean in terms of financial and other commitments in order to be able to make it work. And it would be, I think it's just a page or 2-page brief.
Right.
And then people can either say, yeah, you're there or not. I don't think we need to get too far in the weeds to find out whether or not there's support. I'm very comfortable we can turn that around fairly easily.
Thank you.
Just
Chief
give me
Clements.
$100.
Chief Clements, are you okay with that?
Yeah, it's fine. I can get some stuff put together for the city administrators.
Deputy Chief Fisk, are you okay with that? I see her shaking her head, so I think we're all
Yes,
we're
sir.
all on the right track. Now moving on to item 3, a discussion on opioid recovery staff grant funding. Jim?
As you know, I actually think that the two communities have had the most successful program around. We don't have a lot of people that end up writing stories about it or have the TV cameras, but Megan, that was hired jointly by the two communities, has been done a pretty amazing job when you take a look at it. And when you peel that onion back and seeing the impact, it's been pretty great. Now, initially, I want to say 4 years ago, it might have even been 5, but we initially got some money from the state. And then we were able to put that together, and then that money ran out. And then both communities had committed to funding the position for the next year. And then our grant writer on our side of the table wrote a grant and picked up significant funding for that position over a couple of years. And I don't remember if it was a 2-year or 3-year grant. The bottom line is the funding runs out in June. And so that's about 120 grand expenditure collectively. And so the issue ends up being whether or not the communities are going to want to continue to do that. I can tell you on my side of the budget, we are going to recommend to be able to fund at least our part of it. But we certainly needed to have a conversation with you to know that that funding is going to be necessary for it to continue to be a joint effort. You don't necessarily have to make that decision today, but certainly you're going to need to do that as you wrestle with your own side of the budget. My sense is that the elected officials of Biddeford are very proud of that program, and I think they're going to support it.
Thank you, Jim. Any initial feedback, Brian?
Honestly, I don't really have much familiarity with this. Counselors that were here the last time we funded this, or Bill, do you have more knowledge of this on our side?
I remember the program being very successful. I don't, remember the costs. It was, as I believe it was grant funded at one time, and I want to say it was $50,000, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But I do remember it was a very successful program.
Yeah, I think the grant funding that we got was almost like 100% or nearly 100% funding that our grant writer was able to get, which got both communities, so that we really haven't put a whole lot of money into it. You know, and I don't know if, you know, Jack, if you have an opinion based on the work that, because obviously it helps your guys and gals around the street out in Saco. But that's really, you know, I think the feedback that you need to let your elected leaders know how you, whether you think that's a valuable program or not.
Well, I think if you look at just the numbers that have come out from the state and you look at the number of overdoses and the impact that opiates and drugs in general are having statewide, we're seeing issues, I think, all through Southern Maine. It's a problem, and I think that this program is one that can help us continue to try to get folks into treatment, try to get them some help. We've got to do something because we can't arrest our way out of it. So I certainly think that it's a valuable program. Anything that we can put towards this, I think, is money well spent, because the drug issue and the opiate issue are not going to go away.
Deputy Chief Fisk.
Yeah, I'll second what Jack said, Chief Clements said. Megan does a fantastic job, and the position itself has saved lives. And that's really what we're out for.
Thank you. Council Archer.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. You were a counselor at the time when we were discussing when the grant ran out and the city had to chip in. I believe we were tracking how much we were spending on opioid costs. And that helped the council say, hey, we'll fund it again, because I know we're tracking it for that lawsuit. I think Biddeford's in the same one. We haven't had an update from that lawsuit for a while, but I do remember that council was a little bit more, because it was saving lives, because it was effective, and because there was potential reimbursement down the road. We were on board a couple of years ago, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what my brain's saying at the moment.
Council Archer, I think you're right. I seem to remember some of that same discussion.
Mm-hmm. And there's, at the state level, there's a new task force, or it's reinvented with another doctor coming on board. Is there any funds to continue it from the state?
Yeah, Christine, who's a grant writer, is out seeing if she can find another source for that. But I'm not comfortable in terms of not giving at least the Biddeford Council the true cost of what that is going to be if we don't have funding. If we find the funding afterwards, it will be, a windfall, just like it was last time. Because last time this question came up, and I don't remember if it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago. At some point you get old enough that you can't remember all those details, and I think I hit that a couple of years ago. But both communities funded the position 100%, and I believe it was the second year of the program. And then about 30 or 60 days into the beginning of the new year, Christine had said, I was able to get us a grant to fund the position for a couple of years at either 100% or 90%. I mean, it was significant. And so the community saved the money that you had originally budgeted for that. And we just have kept going on with the program. And that's kind of where we sit right now. So I think the communities have either gotten 4 years or 5 years of that program for probably less than 100 grand collectively over the period of time. And what we can do is, Joanne, can you ask Roger or Stott to maybe chase those numbers so that we can clarify how much, how long Megan's been here and how much we've got into that on either side. Would you be willing to do that so that thank you.
Could you also grab the numbers on the patients saved, all the life-saving data? Again, when you can connect that data to dollar and you can get that dollar cheap, I mean, it's almost self-explanatory. If 5 years we're pretty much on the house, and if we have to just pay for a couple of years, if you divide that by the few years, obviously it's a good deal. Definitely show how the numbers work.
And in our annual report, which we have a new one coming out in a couple of weeks, but last year's, there's a lot of info on there that Megan's numbers, and I hate to use that term, but all that info is in it, and it's right on our website, so.
Yeah, let's just get that report if we can, join, so we can forward it out directly,
Mhm.
please, and thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so I
And
think
why I have a
because,
moment-
oh, go ahead, Jim.
I was just gonna, the other thing, Joanne, if you can, I know you're gonna try to run away and go visit grandchildren or something, but can you, and maybe between you and Roger and Jack and whatever, can you see if you can get us like 3 or 5 names of people that you think could do the dispatch review?
Mhm.
So that we could, that you're in the business, you know who's there, and you're gonna check with the same people I would check, but I'd rather just have you guys get us a list of who you think could do that job, so that then we could fast track that in terms of having that conversation. That would be really helpful if you would.
Sure.
Thanks.
So it seems like this is be a good opportunity to set the next meeting date because it sounds like we have some things, we have some homework on both sides that we have to do to be able to come back. So if we want to set the next meeting date, if everyone has their calendars out or up. And obviously, we want to give some time for folks to collect the data that needs to be collected. So looking at March, would March 18th not work?
I think we have a budget meeting there, and it actually is going to be a fairly big budget night for us.
Okay.
Because I have the rest of the budget that I'm not able to present next week that I have to give them the council that night, which is all of the wastewater and all the other accounts.
How about March
I mean,
25th?
I can't do the 25th, I know.
We
Okay.
have budget that night too.
Yeah, we got budget.
How about Tuesday, the 23rd, March 23rd?
Thursday, April 1st.
We have
Is-
budget.
is-
April
If you
1st.
want to have some progress to be able to vote on something, I would suggest you push it into the first week in April.
Okay.
I know what I have on my plate right now, and it is way stupid in terms of what I have. And then after I get past the 18th, things are going to loosen up on our end. And if you want action, to be able to take some action on something as opposed to just have conversation, it will feel like you're not going fast enough, but I think you're going to be better off if you end up doing it, at least from my perspective, in the first week of April. I don't know how you're feeling about that, Brian, but
Yeah, I
that's-
agree. I agree totally, yeah,
So does April 8th work, Thursday, the 8th?
sure.
we start at 5:30 on our budget meeting. We're Monday and Thursday on our budget meetings generally.
How about the 7th, that Wednesday?
Yeah,
That will probably be a school board meeting for me, Brian.
Oh, okay. 6th,
How about-
Tuesday?
Tuesday, the 6th.
we have council.
No, Monday we
Start
have
with
council.
personnel at 3 and finance at 5.
Wednesday, the 14th. You have school
Yep.
board every Wednesday, Mayor?
It seems like lately I do. They've added some extra meetings, so
So with
Thursday the
enough,
15th?
with enough notice, I could actually do mid-afternoon. If I have enough notice, we can go earlier if needed. In the day, not.
15th.
Alan,
have-
do you, is
Every
is the
Thursday.
13th, Alan, is the 13th of Tuesday, is that your early school board meeting or your late school board meeting?
That's my 4:30 meeting.
So could we do as much as, could we do a 6 o'clock on the 13th?
I mean, I could do that.
Well, that's all that matters, right?
I could juggle that one.
is everyone okay with 6 o'clock on the 13th?
I am, yeah.
And we'll try to keep it to an hour so that everyone's done by 7.
Brian, is the long range meeting that? I don't have it on this calendar that I'm looking at.
I'd have to check the city calendar. I don't know. Long range planning, you mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. Is it on the
Tuesday
city
13th.
calendar? I don't, let me look. There's nothing on the calendar, but
All
I
right,
don't know
I'll
if they
take it
have
then.
up that far yet.
Okay, so we're gonna tentatively say 13 at the 13th of April at 6 PM, and that should give everyone enough time to collect the data that's needed to actually make some decisions. Hopefully, the Harbormaster issue will be our top priority as the spring will be starting, and Harbormaster will be an important position for both communities. With that, the last item on the agenda is other business. I don't have any other business at this time. Is there any other business? Okay, seeing no other business, I want to thank everybody for their time, and we kept it under an hour with 10 minutes to spare, so everyone can enjoy what's left of their evening, or if they have to go to another meeting like I do at 6:30, tough for them.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Nice
Thanks.
seeing you all
Thank
again.
you.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.